Amen. Now, there are steps of faith that I can look back on and I go, man, we really took a step of faith, whether it was me individually or me and with my wife and our kids and taking a step of faith. And I can look back and go, man, there's some times where we took a step of faith and it really like worked out in a way that we had hoped or had an idea of what it could be. But there's also been times where we've taken a step of faith and it hasn't worked out how we thought it would or how we thought it should. And it's really interesting how quick we are when it doesn't work out. We take this step by faith in our lives, and some of you can think of specific scenarios, situations where you really felt like God was maybe telling you to do something or to step out in faith in a certain way, and you did, and in your mind it didn't work out. And I don't know about you, but I struggle immediately going, well, why, God? Why did you do that? Why didn't this happen how I thought it would? And I'm really, really quick to blame God if this step I take by faith doesn't work out how I hoped or think it should. And I think for some of us, that's very true and real for how we feel right now. I think for some of us even, we look at our relationship with God, that moment we decided to follow Jesus, and if some of us are really honest, we would even say today that we feel, some of us, like it hasn't all added up to what I had hoped or thought it would be in my life. And for some of us, we've seen other people take steps of faith, and we've looked at them, and we think, man, that was not worth it. Or that step of faith really didn't work out. And so we'll look at other people's lives and think the same thing. And it is so easy to blame God and to put unfair expectations on God that He has to come through if I am going to take a step by faith. So let's look at Hebrews 11, 33 through 38. Now, the author has sped up, like we saw last week. Like he was like really sitting on these specific characters of the Old Testament, but now he really goes full throttle and starts like listing all these different situations. And Hebrews 11, 33, it says this: who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouth of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty men in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, and mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. Man, the author has sped up, and he starts speaking in generalities here. And some of the people he's speaking or alluding to are from verse 32, but we see him continuing to go forward, and he starts with talking about the conquering of kingdoms. Now, when we look back, the conquering of kingdoms, and as we looked at last week, a guy named Joshua, who led an incredible military victory over Jericho. And when we see him referencing the conquering of kingdoms, likely it's Joshua, and then we go into the Judges, and then its climax is the reign of David, whose conquest established the greatest expanse that Israel's empire ever reached. And the Hebrew audience, the Hebrew recipients of this letter, they would have been able to recall the stories of Israel's great military heroes, from the Judges to even the Maccabees, who fit these descriptions. Barak, Gideon, David were all promised and received victory. Stopping the mouth of lions, that seems to be an easy match to Daniel. But it could also refer to Samson. In Judges 14, 5 and 6, it says this about Samson. It says, then Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah, and they came to the vineyards of Timnah, and behold, a young lion came toward him, roaring. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and although he had nothing in his hand, he tore the lion in pieces as one tears a young goat. But he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. Man, Like Samson is legit. Okay, so when we see stop the mouth of lions, yes, Daniel was rescued in this pit of lions, but Samson, a lion literally comes after him, and he's like, no, okay, okay, like crazy, and he but how did that happen? What did it say happened there? What happened? Huh? You could speak out. Come on. Man, it's I don't know, okay? Like the Spirit of the Lord, right, came upon him. And then we keep going in 1 Samuel. We talk about David. And in 1 Samuel, as David is trying to convince Saul why he should let him fight Goliath, it says this in 1 Samuel 17:34. He says this, "But David said to Saul, 'Your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God.' And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." You see God not only intervening, but empowering and giving these two individuals here, and no doubt with Daniel as well, a glimpse of who he is. And here's the reality when we talk about faith. God grows our faith when we take steps by faith. Okay, so this is in their past. This is stuff that happened where God is giving them a glimpse of who he is and what he can do and what he's about. And I think that's so important for us to see because some of us, we haven't taken any steps of faith in our life, and we wonder, why don't I have this boldness? Why don't I have this confidence that I can move forward by faith? Well, God grows us in faith by faith. He takes us like the steps of faith, like some of us. I remember when I first started following Jesus, and I remember it was so hard for me to just invite someone to church. I remember I was absolutely scared out of my mind to invite people to church. I remember I was a server. I was at Applebee's. And I remember and I'm trying to follow Jesus. And I want to invite some of these coworkers, but I didn't really know how. I was just scared of that whole concept, that idea. I was excited about what God had done in my life. How do I do this in a way that makes them want to come? And so I remember I was just it was like baby steps. I remember I would start off with hey, what are you doing this weekend? And they would tell me, and I would just hope that they would say, what are you doing this weekend? And then I would say, this, I'm going to church. You want to go with me? We'll go to church together. I remember just so scared to invite someone to just church. But because I started inviting people to church, now I'm not hey, can I invite you to church? Now it's where are you at with Jesus right now? Where are you at? Where are you at? Let's talk. What are you wrestling through? I am so excited because I have taken steps of faith and seen God work and operate, and so I'm so much more confident in sharing my faith and what God has done. And for some of you, you need to understand that. Some of you right now, there are things in your heart, in your life, that God is leading you by faith, and you're like, man, it's just too big, or it's too much, or I don't know what will happen. You have to start. God will meet you there where you start. And don't just compare yourself to like Samson and destroying a lion. You've got to start somewhere. And I just want to encourage you, because most of the time when I talk to people in a group setting like this, most people in the room are not actively sharing their faith. Most people are not actively inviting people that have no relationship with Jesus into a space like this. Because most people are scared at the responses, because most people haven't started stepping out in faith in their life. And so I just want to encourage and challenge some of you that he grows our faith when we start taking steps of faith. It says then, he quenched the power of fire. And we think immediately and go to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In Daniel chapter 3, 21 through 27, we know that these individuals, these young men are captives in Babylon, and the king Nebuchadnezzar builds this massive image of himself. And he says, everyone's going to bow down and worship this golden image. And these three young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they decide we're not going to do that because we can't do that because we worship only one God. And in Daniel 3:21, it says this. This is what happened to these guys. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace because the king's order was urgent and the furnace was overheated. The flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast three men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He answered and said, "But I see four men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the fourth is like a son of the gods." Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace. He declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants," now listen to what he says here, "servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. And the satraps and the prefects and the governors and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their head was not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire had come upon them. That's what God could do. That's what God can do. This Hebrew audience is just being reminded this is what God can do by faith. These individuals refuse to worship something they've got no business worshiping, remaining true to God, and by faith, they allow themselves to be thrown into this fiery furnace. And many believe the pre-incarnate Jesus shows up in that fiery furnace and is with them. And there's literally no proof that any fire has been a part of them. To act as they did without some revelation from God demonstrated even greater faith. You know what's so amazing about this is God didn't appear to them earlier and say, "Hey, so this is what's going to happen, and you're going to stand up for me, and this is what I'm going to do." He didn't say that to them. They're going at this just from the purity of faith in their heart, in their lives, and the confidence that God is who He says He is. And that's enough. And so they're willing to go through that, not knowing what God's going to do. The remaining events that we looked at, the remaining events are much more general when we look at them. We talk about those who escaped the edge of the sword, it talks about. And we know from history that Elijah was delivered from Jezebel, Elisha from Jehoram, Jeremiah from Jehoiakim, and David escaped Saul's attacks. As many of the judges and prophets illustrate, God chose weak and foolish things to confound the things that were mighty and wise. Like when you look at Gideon, and we talked about Gideon last week, but Gideon, when I think of Gideon and all that happened through him, you have to go back to the very beginning. Like Gideon is there, and the angel of the Lord comes and tells him what he's going to do through Gideon, and then this is Gideon's response to that, where you think we would be like, "Oh my goodness, let's go, I can't believe you're going to use me." Gideon's response is this, in Judges 6:15. And he said to him, "Please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." Listen, just so you know, my family's the most poor, and I am the weakest in my house. And you're going to use me? And God's like, you and 300 to defeat over 100,000. But that's Gideon. That was Gideon. When you think of Samson, again, in Judges 15, it's crazy what God does, not to magnify a person, but to magnify God. And in Judges 15, the situation is the Israelites they come to Samson and they're like, hey, like you did this to the Philistines, they are lords over us, like there's thousands of them, we have to deliver you to them. And so they bind him up, and they're going to bring Samson to the Philistines. And in Judges 15, 14 and 15, it says, when he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting to meet him. And then, here we go again, the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. Remember, Samson was not this massively yoked guy. In fact, people couldn't figure out how he was so strong. It says, then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became as flax that has caught fire, and his bonds melted off his hands. And he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, and put out his hand and took it, and with it he struck 1,000 men. What? 1,000 men, and they see Samson now that was probably pretty cool to see, but then it's like, what are you doing, man? Like, come on, just pick him up, tie him back on. Nothing's going to happen. Like, look. And he grabs a jawbone of a donkey. And once again, really? That? And then God does something that only God can do. At the end of Samson's life, once again, in his weakest state, his eyes have been gouged out. He's a slave. He's a laughingstock. They literally bring him to perform where all of these Philistines are in this massive space, and they bring him to laugh at him, to be entertainment for them. And he goes in there, and in his weakest state, he says, God, please, just one more time. And God uses him in his weakest state to deliver more than he's ever delivered through him. And these individuals and these judges and these stories, they illustrate 1 Corinthians 1:27. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. Faith brought men strength beyond what was natural and enabled them to overcome insurmountable odds. Example after example is given to assure the Hebrews that no matter what they might be called upon to face for their faith, God is able to deliver if he wills. Their allegiance to God and unwavering determination to serve him was founded on a commitment to him, not on the promise of deliverance. It mentions women who received back their dead. We know that Elijah brought back to life the child of the widow of Zarephath in 1 Kings 17. And his successor, Elisha, did the same for a Shunammite woman's son in 2 Kings 4:18. But it's very interesting, and this is really, to me, the most important piece in these verses. In 35b to 38, we see kind of a shift in direction, because we've just looked at all the situations where by faith God comes through and rescues. And so you read those verses, the first part, and you're like, let's go. Let's do something crazy for God. But then it's 35b through 38. And it reminds us that the outcomes of faith were not always positive by the world's standards. And this is very important for us to see today. And you got to be dialed into this, because in our world right now, the religious climate, what so many people that I know that are listening to things and believing is that if you step out by faith, God is going to do what you want him to do. I hear more and more people's religion is really, and the promise of what they're agreeing to by following Jesus is they think if I just step out and operate by faith, God is going to do all these things on this earth and bless me in all these ways. And so it's literally just like, if I just do that, he will come through for me. And the problem is we have to read this. And we've got to go, no, because what we see here, we see, no, these people weren't rescued. It talks about torture. The form of torture indicated here by the Greek verb involved stretching the victim over a large drum-like instrument, and the stomach was beaten as one beats a drum until muscle walls collapsed and death occurred from the internal injuries. Some in faith were tortured and refused the opportunity to gain their freedom at the cost of renouncing their faith. Do you understand that? Like literally, like you're going to be tortured, or, hey, just say this and you'll be okay. We'll let you go. You can get out of this. You don't have to go through this. And they refused that. In the time of the Maccabees, the Greeks tried to force pagan religion on the Jewish people. And there's a story about a mother and her 7 sons, and they were all put to death. And every son had to watch and watch as the other son was. And these are just, how they were killed is just beyond description. Horrible. And they're forced to watch that because they would not eat the pork. They refused. And that's all they had to do. People are like, dude, just fake it. Just chew on it. Nope. To these people of faith, no affliction was escapable that required denial or compromise of God's word. Willingness to accept the worst the world has to offer because of trust in the best God has to offer, the resurrection. They would not sacrifice the future on the altar of the immediate. They preferred death because by faith they knew that one day they'd be resurrected. The hope of the resurrection gave them courage to stay the course. What's your hope rest in when your faith is challenged? Like, where do you go to? Like we heard last week, you can't go to you. The problem with going to you is you're very limited. Like you can only do so much. I'm reminded of that. We've got 3 kids now. Me is very limited. Like that is the reality. But some of us, we rely when we take these steps of faith, but all of a sudden it gets a little too big for us. We go, no, I can just do this. I can push myself through it. You don't know my background. You don't know how strong I am. You don't know what I've been through. I don't know what you've been through. But I'm telling you right now, if you start taking steps of faith, there will be points in time that you are incapable of getting out of by yourself. And then I was sharing my faith with this lady, and this lady was like, she was so close. And as I'm sharing my faith, and I'm asking her, well, where do you go when this hasn't worked out? Where do you go? And she started talking about things she's done, and then she finally said, I have really great friends in my life. And I go, okay, what happens when those friends aren't there for you? Where do you go? Like, where do you go with that? You've got nowhere else to go. And for some of us, I want to ask you, where do you go? Like, where do you go when you are overmatched, overwhelmed? They endured both mental and physical anguish, mocking as well as flogging. Jeremiah was emotionally abused as he was physically abused. He was beaten and put in stocks, and he complained that he had been made a laughingstock, an object of mockery, not only by the public, but by members of his own family. How hard is it when you take steps of faith, and yes, you deal with persecution, but then all of a sudden your own family turns against you. Your own family is mocking you. Your own family is talking about you behind your back. Your own family has labeled you. Oh, they're the religious one. Oh, here we go. Of course you're going to go to church. Da-da-da-da-da. Like labeled, mocked, made fun of. And you know what? I'll just say this. In our culture, we are so spoiled that this is not a bigger deal. We are so spoiled. I was talking with one of our students who's a foreign exchange student that's here, that goes to Ekklesia College, and we were talking, and this girl, and it is amazing. She's not able to get baptized today, but she's going to get baptized in January, and it is amazing what God has done in her life just from her being here. And we met because she wanted to know, how do I go back to my country and deal with the opposition I'm going to face from my family? How do I deal with that? I've got to go back. For some of us, that doesn't even register. We don't even know what that's like. But this is real for people. And she's wrestling with that. It's so hard. And Jeremiah's story is so hard. At a later date, he was beaten again and put in prison. And then he was taken from there and thrown into this muddy cistern. According to tradition, Jeremiah was stoned at the hands of Jews in Egypt. Jesus reminded the scribes and Pharisees that their ancestors had stoned Zechariah between the sanctuary and the altar. Tradition holds that Isaiah was sawn in two during Manasseh's reign. I know, the Bible. Yes, in there. If you're new, welcome. Start with the Gospels, okay? Although Jeremiah was delivered from Jehoiakim, his fellow prophet Uriah was cut down by the sword in Jeremiah 26:23. King Saul, in a jealous rage, ordered the execution of the priests who had befriended David. Numerous prophets were killed in the time of Elijah. When you look at 1 Kings 18:4, it gives you an idea of just the climate that these men of God had to deal with. In 1 Kings 18:4, and Ahab's the king, Jezebel's the queen, and she is literally like, I want to wipe out every man of God, every prophet. And it says this in 1 Kings 18:4, and when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah, who was in their house, who feared God, took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in a cave and fed them with bread and water. Like, can you just even imagine that? Can you imagine what these individuals are going through, what they were dealing with just for standing up for God, for proclaiming God's word, God's will to these people? Clement of Rome points to Elijah, Elisha, and Ezekiel, to those who wore sheepskins and goatskins, who were destitute, persecuted, mistreated, wandering in deserts and mountains. We know Elijah stayed in a cave, and holes in the ground. And the parenthetical comment here, humanity was not worthy of them, means that society did not deserve to possess these people. Literally, society did not deserve these people. The world did not deserve to have these people because of the faith that they demonstrated. The demonstration of their faith did not bring freedom from persecution and death. I remember listening to a pastor, and he was speaking about doing a hospital visit. And he goes in to visit this lady at this hospital, and he walks into her room, and she's weeping, she's crying. And he walks in, and as he's visiting her, he says, what's wrong? And she just hands him this book with this letter. And what had happened is another individual had sent her a letter and said, read this book, and you will be healed. And the book was about how if you just have enough faith, you will get healed. And this lady followed Jesus, loved Jesus, was committed to Jesus. And she's reading this and so discouraged because the mindset is, what's wrong with me? Well, what's wrong with my faith then? Like, if this is true, then why am I still here? Why is my life not worthy? Like what's wrong with me? And some of us have felt this way. Some of us have signed up for a religion that promised that hey, if you just have enough faith, like everything's going to work out for you exactly how you want it to. You'll be healed no matter what. Everything like with your bank account, you're going to be fine. All these things. And you signed up for that, but for whatever reason, that hasn't worked out. And now you're questioning everything because you were presented with a gospel that's not even true. And the reality is when we look at these things, like listen, I'll just say this right now. I've visited people, many people in hospitals, and I have seen God miraculously heal some. Unbelievable things. I have seen people, I have seen a man with this, literally gets this disease out of nowhere, young, healthy, my age, and it's burning his body up. They had to sew his mouth shut. They didn't know what was happening to him. And I watched God heal him miraculously. And I have seen other people and visited other people, and we've prayed for them. And for whatever reason, it didn't happen. God does not have to heal in order to prove that someone has faith. It wasn't, oh, that's why. You don't have enough faith. Oh, your faith is so special. It wasn't that. Verses 36 through 38 show that many men and women of faith were not delivered from their circumstances, yet God honored their faith. It takes more faith to endure than it does to escape. Some of you are enduring right now. Like some of you, you're like, man, I just want it out. Like, I just can't. I don't know how much longer I can keep going. This just isn't working out. My situation, if you knew my situation and you're just enduring, I just want to encourage you, this isn't it for you if you're a Jesus follower. This isn't it for you. We must trust God and be willing to obey him even if he does not deliver us. We must never conclude that the absence of deliverance means a lack of faith in someone's life. God gave power through faith to help some of his people through these problems, not to escape them. Do you understand how much faith it must have taken to just go through that torture? To just go through that? I mean, like God gave them, God gave them incredible strength to just be able to go through it. And sometimes that's what he does. And sometimes it's not necessarily about escaping the problem. Just as it's sometimes God's will for his people to conquer a struggle, it is also sometimes his will for them to continue in their struggle. And that's hard. And I'm sorry that these are the verses I got, but I changed. I switched with Ian. Listen, I know people who literally, I worked with a pastor who used to do cocaine, and he quit in one day, and it was like done, never went back to it, miraculously healed from that addiction. But guess what? I have spoken in many recovery homes with many individuals who are trying so hard to follow God and kick an addiction. And for whatever reason, it has not happened for them. That doesn't mean that this guy's faith was just like able to move mountains and theirs is just like, oh, what's wrong with you and all this? Like, why, I've never spoken in a recovery home and been like, hey, you just need more faith. I've never said that. In fact, I just feel so sorry for them, and I just want to try and extend the love of Jesus, because I tell you what, like God is God, and he's able to do whatever he wants, but sometimes we just have no idea how he's using a struggle. We just don't. It's above our pay grade. We have no idea. And it's hard because we want release. We want freedom from something. And we see other people and we hear stories of what's happened to these other people. But you cannot compare yourself to these other people. God has his own story for you. And it's enough, not because of you, it's enough because he's God. And God is love. He defines love. Why is it like this? I don't know. But I know he's working. He will give them victory, spiritual victory, the only kind of victory he guarantees. It often takes more courage to hold on than to fight on. They courageously suffered for the Lord because of faith. They knew, like Paul, that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. Romans 8:18. And they looked forward, like Peter, to an inheritance which is imperishable, undefiled, and unfading, kept in heaven for you. 1 Peter 1:4. God does not promise his followers deliverance from suffering. To the contrary, Jesus said what? Take up your cross and follow me. And he said, if they persecuted me, they will persecute you. You know, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were confident that God would save them from the fiery furnace. Like Daniel 3:17, it says, if this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. And the king's like, oh, okay. But their greatest faith was not shown in their certainty of deliverance. They went on to say this in verse 18. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. But if not, like in other words, we fully believe and we're going to move forward by faith that God is going to save us. But if not, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We're not going to do what we know we should not do. We are not going to go against everything we believe in to be true about God. We are not going to worship you. Their concern was not for the safety of their lives, but for the safety of their faith. Deliverance or not, they would not forsake their trust in God. Could you say that? Like, could you say that? Even if you could be killed, even if it's not going to work out, it's really easy to make a bold declaration of something that you know is going to happen. It's really hard to step out there in faith and share your faith with someone, and you deliver this, and you go, like, I don't know what God's going to do with your life, but I know he's worth following. It's hard because we just want to know, like, it's going to work out. It's going to work out, right? Faith in God carries with it no guarantees of comfort in this world, but it does carry with it great reward in the only world that ultimately matters. And I don't know about you, but my tendency is to be consumed with, why did he choose some of these individuals to rescue, and why did some of these other individuals get left out? Like in my flesh. Like I go back to that, and I look at situations like that, and I even take that into my present day circumstance. And I go, man, God, well, why did you intervene there? Why did you save that person? But then, like, here, that happened, and I struggle with this. But then need to be reminded that this misses the whole point when we start thinking this way. Those people were offered an out, but they didn't take it because of the value they placed on the better resurrection. Like that's what's crazy to me. Like here I am going, man, like God, why didn't you rescue them? And then I read those verses and it's like, oh yeah, well they had the opportunity to not do that. They had the opportunity to just like bow down to the golden image. They had an opportunity to just be like everybody else. They had that option. But when we get hung up on this idea, we've become the people who place the value of God's love for us on how he comes through for us in this life on this earth. When I start thinking this way and saying, well, why didn't you do that here? And why is it like this here? And why don't you do this for me? I'm treating my existence on earth like it's the final chapter. And that's backwards from what the Bible tells us about faith. These people were honored to not be rescued by faith. You see that? When someone comes out of the water, and we've got baptisms today, when someone comes out of the water, it's a picture of resurrection to the new life, but it's a foreshadow of the resurrection to come at the end of that person's life because of them putting their faith and hope and trust in Jesus. We move forward by faith regardless of what happens or doesn't happen because of who he is. Like we move forward regardless because of who he is. The demonstrations of power were all about him. What did Daniel say? Daniel wasn't the point. Daniel said he shut the mouth of the lions. God shut the mouth of those lions. Nebuchadnezzar goes, he was amazed at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God. He was amazed at their God. It was all about God. He's the point. You put your faith in him. And that has to be enough. Romans 10:9 says, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Like that's it. I went to the dentist, and I haven't been to the dentist, and my dentist is here, so I have to be really honest. I went to the dentist. I haven't been to the dentist in a long time, and for some of you that need to go, you need to hear this. But I haven't been in a long time. I'm not going to say in years, but it's been long. And I went. And as I went, and they opened up my mouth and looked, I mean, it had been years, and they saw stuff. And it wasn't like a one-visit checkup. It was a one-visit, let's take a look at what we're dealing with, and then let's get the appropriate saws and drills, and like, let's go to work, right? And so they look at that, and then through multiple follow-up dentist visits, they slowly got this thing right. And I was thinking about that because I sat in a chair a long time in the last 2 weeks. How amazing is it that God offers to do what took so long for my mouth, he offers to do with your life just like that. That if you confess with your mouth today that Jesus is Lord, believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And in that moment, he gives you a new life. In that moment, he meets you where you're at. In that moment, when you confess all that ugliness, all that past, all those years of neglect, just like my mouth, and instead of him going, oh my goodness, well, I saw that, I've seen this, like you're gonna need like a lot of visits before I can offer salvation to you. No, he goes, let's go. Come on, bring that nastiness, let's go. I've got salvation for you today. And for some of us, we need to hear that because we have been just so brought up in this, like this religious, entrenched, like mindset that I have to this and this and this and this. And no, that's not the gospel. The gospel is acknowledging and believing what Jesus said he did and saying, I want to follow him, and confessing in my heart that he is Lord and Savior of my life, and then saying, I'm going to follow you. Because he bridged, like Jesus is the one that bridged that huge like canyon between us and a perfect and holy God. And we just have to literally respond to his free invitation. And at the moment that we say, God, I want to make you Lord and Savior of my life, I'm going to follow you. Just like that. I want to challenge some of you who have never made that decision to make that right now. If you need to make that right now, make that right now. And for some of you that need to be baptized and to publicly declare that, I love talking with people that are excited to get baptized. They cannot wait to show people what God has just done in their life. And if that's you and you need to get baptized and you need to say this prayer with him and then go get baptized, go get baptized. But right now, let's just pray.